Hi, my name is Daphne Thomson, and I help municipalities implement AI. And today, there has been so many questions about AI and sustainability. So I finally have a expert in the field, Sean Carlson. He is the division manager for Brownfield Environmental Services at McElhanney to chat to us about AI and the potential environmental effects that it has. Welcome, Sean.
Thanks, Daphne, for the introduction.
Do you want to tell us a little bit more about you?
Yeah, for sure. So I am the division manager for Brownfield Environmental Services with McElhanney. McElhanney's a BC and Alberta-based or Western Canada-based consulting firm everywhere from geomatics to engineering, environmental planning, landscape architecture. So we touch almost any aspect of a development project, planning project, or environmental project. Sustainability, I wouldn't classify myself as an expert in that field, but sustainability is something that touches all of our businesses in the engineering and environmental world. And we have to interact with that and understand how it impacts our businesses. And so in my case, that's largely around contaminated sites and dealing with soil and contaminated water and just the general contaminated lands perspective. So in that setting, for sure, we have to deal with that. And there's a lot of synergies and analogies and items that are, I would say, relate between those fields that we can talk about today.
All right, so let's jump right into it, because you're kind of touching on a little bit of the things that we've been chatting about. So we all know that AI and the revolution of AI is sometimes compared to like when electricity came on board, or when the steam train was started, and all of that had massive environmental impacts as well. But we had to find the balance to still keep with the effectiveness and the technology progress and keep the environmental side of it effective, right? So now it's being said that 500 milliliters of water is kind of equivalent to 20 AI searches. So when we think about that effect of the sustainability of AI, all the data centers have to be kept cool. So how can you, or how would you kind of frame this for us to be more aware of what that actually looked like in everyday life?
Yeah, so it's tough. Like with AI or with changing technology, the pace is just like, it is incredibly fast. In our lifetime, the way I think about this, in our lifetime, we've seen these revolutions, these different types of industrial revolutions at a far more frequent pace than previous generations have ever experienced. Like when the automobile came, or when the internet first came about, we're having to see these new tools and these new ways of doing work. We see them come up far more quickly, and we have to learn and pivot and understand their impacts often before we even understand what it's going to do to the environment. Whereas we would have historically implemented a process, been able to monitor and observe it for many years, incrementally improve upon it over that time. And I think of, like, say, locally in Prince Rupert, historically we had a pulp mill produce different types of pulp. We, over time, the process had no or very few environmental controls around the quality of the water being discharged, what that's doing to the environment, how much water it's using. And over the 50 years or 50, 60, 70 years, 50, I have to do the math. But anyways, over the multiple years that facility operated, there was incremental changes, some small, some large, that came in. And some had big impacts, some had smaller impacts. And so with AI and data centers and their impacts, right now we can estimate that, but do we really know the full impact that that's going to have as this technology develops? And are we even going to be able to see that at the scale and pace that's happening right now? And those are really hard questions. Those are questions that I don't know if we necessarily have the answer to yet around.
All right. When we started chatting offline, we started brainstorming about different ways
Yeah.
that we could find balance. And some of that was, all right, well, finding it in a cooler center already, like, for example, a rainforest that already brings down the temperatures for the data centers. But could we maybe look at other options? Like, could we redirect some of this to a greenhouse to combine an AI data center with a greenhouse? What would that look like? Is there something that could balance out some of the harmful effects? Or could we could we use some of the molds that are decommissioned? Can we use that as a data center already that has got power already sent to it? So what are some of these things
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
can
No.
use to offset the damaging effects of what it could potentially have in the environment?
Yeah. No. And that's a really good point. So we did talk about when we first met, just around how because these essentially are industries. AI, yes, is a tool that we use. That we type in searches, we ask it silly questions, we ask it important questions. We want it to help us do our jobs more efficiently or reduce certain burdens that we have. But ultimately, on the back end, it is just another industry. It's like a pulp mill, and so the infrastructure needs a home. It needs to have power. Uh, it needs to function properly and continuously, so that we have access to all these tools or benefits that it produces in our daily life. And so, in looking at it from through, say, the lens of my work and sustainability, brownfield work, contaminated sites, and sustainability, we're seeing a pivot, especially in BC, where tons of sawmills, lots of old pulp and paper mills that used to be huge consumers of water, of electricity, are shutting down because, one, we're not using paper products in the same way, or pulp, and two, we're not as competitive in those industries because of the labor requirements. Not to oversimplify it as well, there's a lot of other factors that are going into that. But now, after those industries shut down, we're left with these massive sites, these what we would call a brownfield site, where there might be historic contamination that we have to deal with. And sometimes dealing with that contamination poses its own sustainability question around how we remediate it and what we do. But it's also potentially an opportunity where we can explore how we pivot and look at brownfield remediation through the lens of AI data centers and sustainability around where these facilities are placed, because cooling often requires water or some form of media to achieve that. And we noted electricity, and often pulp and paper mills were huge consumers of electricity historically, and they need space. They just need lots and lots of space to operate. And if they don't need a lot of people around there from a brownfield site, and this is more of a risk assessor question, but if you don't have people actually working at those sites and interacting with them, the risk is lower from a exposure perspective. So, and often there's buildings over them to keep the land capped and covered, so you're in some ways encapsulating that contamination. So from a question of sustainability, we often think about, there's the way we could think about it from a life cycle perspective, where we want to know from concept to sort of cradle to grave, is the old expression would go when we're looking at it, from the start of the plan all the way to once that AI data center is no longer needed. And then there's all the aspects of the actual operational sustainability. So how much, as we noted, how much energy or it uses on a ongoing basis or per search. But there's the sustainability of essentially the component of where these facilities actually go. And that's something that I think from a local government perspective or BC perspective, we can look at that, just that part from a sustainability perspective. So
All right, so What are some of the questions that a local government should be asking when we are looking at, for example, having a data center in our environment? Should we be asking questions like, are there soil contamination? What happens during outages? What does it mean environmentally? Like, what are some of the questions that they need to ask before deciding if this is a good thing or a bad thing to have that in their community?
I think the first is, do they have a, like, is there not to oversimplify it, but is there an existing site where these facilities could go that could essentially replace a former industry that's no longer in play or being actively used? We talked about a few of them, but there's likely many others that can be in there. Is the construction of this facility going to cause irreparable damage or harm to the environment that can't be mitigated? So looking at it through the same lens of environmental assessments, not to that necessarily same extent, because we're not developing it. Do we have the existing infrastructure there to feed it? And that could be power, that could be water, that if there's other utilities that are required. Do they have fire protection for these facilities? Do they, when they need service, are there people trained to actually do the work, or are we having to fly in and fly out trained technicians all the time to manage it? All of that has its own question of sustainability and impacts to the environment from a transportation perspective. And then what happens at the end, at the end of the life cycle, when this data center is no longer needed, or it reaches the end of its practical life and needs to be decommissioned? What do we do with the actual physical components so that we don't end up with another negative legacy, potentially like what's happened with some former pulp mills in the province? How do we plan for that now so that we equip ourselves and taxpayers and decision makers to know that there's a plan in place at the end of it, at the end of what the data center of today looks like? Because the data center of today may not be the data center of 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, or 30 years from now.
What are some of the things that we can mitigate this risk with a lens of environmental sustainability? What are some of the things that communities can keep in mind to mitigate risk, to try and go more green? What are things that they should be thinking of?
Yeah, going back to a couple of those earlier points, just around the physical infrastructure of a data site, or the back end item, to go through and suggest that you would build a data center on forested land, I think would be a full non-starter. It's really got to, if there's the business case to build a data center in our communities or in BC, from a local government lens, it's around, do we have existing land that can be repurposed for this use, that we have the connectivity to those utilities? And then really starting that point, is starting there as where we need to go from a risk management perspective. To build something new would be quite expensive and quite the challenge, and present a lot of hurdles that you may not necessarily see the benefit from. If someone was already going to build something that required a lot of power and a lot of land, they likely would have already done it in that area from where we've come from. So
what are some of the sustainability lessons that we can learn from other booming industries like the internet or the steam train or something? What lessons can we learn to not make those mistakes when it comes to sustainability and environmental sustainability specifically with our new data centers and AI?
Everything I think at some point comes to an end. So we largely need to know how we deal with the waste that comes from it, or the undesired end product that is the of these systems. So how do we deal with the pieces of the center? Like we hear, however, whether it's true or not, around, say, windmills and wind turbine blades, how do we recycle or repurpose components that have a shelf life, and where do those go? In a lot of our communities, municipal waste management is a big deal, and we may go and build a data center, and then in 5 years we need to upgrade components, or we need to add on to it, but we may not know what we can do with all the parts that are no longer serviceable, that need to be disposed of or recycled. And really asking that question up front is going to be the big question, because once you're left holding the bag, especially as a local government, if someone doesn't want it, doesn't see value in that land at the end of, when they've finished using it, they can walk away. They can, don't pay their taxes. And then, especially as a municipality who relies on taxes for other municipal services, you're now left with this albatross of a site that you have to try and figure out what to do with it again. So from a environmental sustainability perspective, really knowing how you're going to deal with the site, both from an what are the waste streams that they'll have to deal with it, whether that's heat, hot water, light pollution during operation, to what happens when components of the system need to be replaced or removed and disposed of, and then what happens when the facility is going to be decommissioned at the end of its life. Even if that's part of the business case and planning, that's hugely important to the overall sustainability of it. And then the other part, thinking about kind of more in depth too, if you do need water, where are you getting that water from? Is it going to have an impact on the watersheds? Is it going to have an impact on your drinking water supply? Is it going to cause changes to the local environment if you have that excess heat coming in to the system again? You have to find ways to cool that water or extract that heat from the system before you sort of send those streams out to the environment. Can you recycle aspects of, can you recycle that water once it's cooled down again, if you've been able to extract heat from those centers? So these are questions that designers and engineers and planners of these data centers will need to ask. But as local governments, these are things that ultimately you're the ones who are going to have to interface with that at the end of the day, and are going to be impacted by it if it's not articulated in planning documents and bylaws, and fully relying on those parties who are likely motivated to just get the job done, which is a good thing. That's how we've seen industries come up, but it's also having that trust but verify attitude of questions. So
what it sounds like is, when we approach the data centers and the sustainability aspect of it, it's more of a holistic point of view, like you said, from beginning to end, because AI is inherently not unsustainable. It's more how we deal with it. because the electricity or heating system, eventually they became more cleaner and smarter and more efficient over time. The data centers would probably follow the same type of stream. The goal is balance, right? It's creating the value versus the resources that we consume. And sustainability is definitely not about just stopping all progress, exactly like you said. It's more about shaping it while we have the chance, right? So what is one thing that you want to leave our local government listeners with regarding when data centers come involved and AI and sustainability? What is the one thing that you just want them to always think about when this comes up?
I think the biggest thing is it's another tool, and we have to, all of us need to be willing to adopt new ways of doing things, and taking those tools and figuring out how we can use them effectively in our organizations or what we do. With AI being probably one of the most recent biggest changes that we're all experiencing. In a year, 2 years, AI may have a completely different look than it does today.
Yeah.
And have a completely different setting. So in a lot of ways, it's around setting up our system so that we can be nimble, so that we can stop when things aren't working and pivot. And for some, that may look like just sticking with, you know, the status quo, but in a sense, allowing the foundation to just carry on trucking forward while we make incremental change. For others, it may be being the early adopters, and it's really about knowing what works in your organization and where you're at in that evolution. But really come back to the point of just being able to pivot and be nimble to these changes, and to recognize that the pace that things are changing at is far faster today than it's ever been. And
yeah,
it's not about keeping up, it's just about keeping aware of what's around us and how that may impact what we do. So,
well, thank you so much, Sean. This is super enlightening and helpful that we are having these conversations. So I really appreciate your time. If someone wants to get hold of McElhanney and their services, where would they go?
Go to our website. There's contact information there for all of our offices. Or you probably, if you haven't seen our trucks or haven't seen our office, then you haven't been looking around. But yeah, go to our website, reach out. All those emails are responded to, and you can get a hold of someone in your area to help support you, or reach out to one of us on LinkedIn, and we'll definitely respond as well. So,
well, thank you so much, Sean. Well, that was it for AI and sustainability. If there's anything else that you specifically want to listen to or hear about AI, please do the comments below, and remember to subscribe. See you next time.